I am reading to you this morning from our new book of the month, The Sermon on the Mount by Emmett Fox. I want to preface this reading because this reading refers to a New Testament story. And I want to make sure that we all remember or learn that story. It's the story of the rich man who comes to Jesus and he says, "How do I get eternal life?" And Jesus says, "Follow the commandments." And he says, "Well, I do that." And Jesus says, "Well, sell all of your possessions and follow me." "Oh, I could never do that." And he walks away. And so today's reading refers to that story. From page 21, Emmett Fox tells us, one of the saddest passages in all literature is the story of the rich young man who missed one of the great opportunities of history and turned away sorrowful because he had great possessions. This is really the story of humankind in general. We reject the salvation that Jesus offers us, our chance of finding God, because we have great possessions. Not because we are very rich in terms of money, for indeed most of us are not, but because we have great possessions in the way of preconceived ideas, confidence in our own judgment and in the ideas with which we happen to be familiar, spiritual pride, sentimental or material attachment to institutions and organizations, habits of life that we have no desire to renounce, concern for the opinions of others, or perhaps fear of public ridicule, or a vested interest in worldly honor and distinction. And these possessions keep us chained to the rock of suffering that is our exile from God. The rich young man is one of the most tragic figures in history, not because he happened to be wealthy, for wealth in itself is neither good nor bad, but because his heart was enslaved by his wealth. He could have been a multimillionaire in silver and gold, and as long as his heart was not set upon it, he would have been just as free as the poorest beggar to enter the kingdom of heaven. His trust, however, was in his riches, and this shut the gate. This week's affirmation is a bit of a long one, and so rather than read it through for you, I'm going to invite you to stand with me. And let me tell you, actually, before you stand, let me say something about these affirmations. This series, we are going to have a new affirmation each week, and they are kind of long. And your job, you have the affirmation for each week on a card that's in your bulletin. Your job is to take this affirmation home and put it somewhere where you will see it, and to say it many, many times a day. This is your prayer practice for this week. Please stand and join me as we declare our affirmation together with conviction. I surrender my preconceived notions of God, of life, of events to a bigger idea, an idea of love, peace, and grace. Emptying myself of opinions, habits of thought, human views and prejudices, I jettison anything and everything that stands in the way of my finding the God of my being. I depend only on that infinite presence and am fully convinced that the universe is in a conspiracy for my good. And so it is. Knock, knock. Atch. God bless you. Okay, it's a silly little joke. And it's a silly little joke that my niece pulled on me when she was 3 years old. And I was thinking about it on the way in this morning. She now has a 3-year-old. So that will tell you how long ago that was. It's the kind of joke that makes a 3-year-old just howl with laughter. And I thought it was pretty funny, too. You know, we use this word bless a lot, don't we? Bless you when we sneeze or when we're unhappy with someone. Well, bless his little heart. You ever said that? Sometimes in surprise, I will say, oh, bless me. Or we say, bless you. Thank you. I feel so blessed. We use that word a lot, but what does it mean? Well, you'll be surprised to learn that I looked it up. To be blessed is to be blissfully happy or contented. To convey a blessing is to make holy or to sanctify. Bless you. May you be blissfully happy and contented. May you be holy. May you be sanctified. May you be consecrated to a greater work here on planet Earth. God bless you. I bless you. May you walk in blessing. Sounds pretty good to me. This summer, the balance of the summer, for all of July and August, we will be talking about how to live a more blessed life and how to be a bigger blessing to those around us and how to be a bigger blessing to the planet. And the tool that we are using to learn these strategies are the Beatitudes, which are found in the book of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, not John, in the Gospels, and which are amplified here in our book of the month, the Sermon on the Mount by Emmett Fox. The Beatitudes is a group of teachings that Jesus gave his people as ways to embody bliss, happiness, contentment. In fact, each one of the Beatitudes starts with, blessed is the one who, happy and content, sanctified to the holy work of the divine, is the one who. So would you like to be supremely happy? Yes. Me too. Would you like to live in a world in which more people than are supremely happy? Yes. Me too. So I'm turning to page 17 in the book, and I want to read the Beatitudes to you. There's a little introduction that Emmett Fox gives us. He says, the Beatitudes are actually a prose poem in 8 verses, which is complete in itself, and it constitutes what is practically a general summary of the whole Christian teaching. It is a spiritual, more than a literary synopsis, summarizing the spirit of the teaching rather than the letter. So now I'm going to read the Beatitudes to you. And each week, as you hear these, each week we will be talking about one of them. But here is the full piece, so you know what you have to look forward to. It begins with this. And seeing the multitudes, Jesus went up into a mountain, and when he was set, his disciples came unto him. Now, this in itself, it starts out in a really interesting way. The multitudes, right? Did Jesus get down with the multitudes? No, what did he do? He went up to the mountaintop of consciousness. He lifted himself above the human ways of thinking, and when he was set, not when he was down here messed up in the human stuff, when he was high, raised in consciousness, he opened his mouth, and I think this is really a great one too. He opened his mouth and began to teach, is the way it says in the book of Matthew. And that's interesting to me because he didn't think about what he was going to say. He opened his mouth and allowed God to speak. When he was set, his disciples, those who are in the discipline of his teaching, they came to him and he said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blissfully happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. What? We'll get there. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. And that is the prose poem. Emmett Fox goes on to say, Jesus concerned himself exclusively with the teaching of general principles. These are general principles, right? They're not specific instructions. Nowhere does it say, go be kind to people. It says, blessed is the one who's kind, right? These general principles always had to do with mental states. For he knew that if one's mental states are right, everything else must be right too. 8 ways to be blissfully happy in the Beatitudes. They are mental states of consciousness, and when we embody those, we become more blissfully happy and contented. We sanctify our lives in service to the divine. And I have chosen to style these Beatitudes as blissitudes, because these are the attitudes and habits and behaviors that lead us to our bliss. Are you ready for your summer of bliss? Me too. So let's get going on our first blissitude. Blessed, this is a weird one. Blessed are the poor in spirit. What? What is that? What? I don't get that. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit. I have to make sure I'm saying this exactly right. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. What is poor in spirit? First off, we're not talking about material poverty. Remember the story of the young man? The rich young man? He didn't have to be poor to follow the teaching. He had to be not attached to his money, right? So we're not talking about material poverty, and we're not even talking about spiritual poverty, which it might be tempted to think, blessed are the poor in spirit. We're not talking about spiritual poverty. What we're talking about is being spiritually available to a greater message, being spiritually available to all that God has for us. Am I willing to surrender my false ideas, my opinions, my fears of being judged? Am I willing to surrender everything to the greater idea of God in my life? Am I spiritually available? Am I poor in spirit? That is, in the Lamsa version of the New Testament, it's translated as, blessed are the poor in pride. I'm just letting that sink in. Blessed are the poor in pride. You see, we can admit to ourselves and before the world that we have room to grow, that we don't know it all. We are not pompous. There is something deep in us that is yearning to know God more deeply, and we can be humble and available to that in front of our own hearts and in front of others. We're willing to be led by God instead of trying to control and make things happen the way we think it ought to be. Is this familiar to anybody? And every time I've tried to control and make things happen the way Marla thinks it ought to be, I fall flat on my face. And I'm humbled anyway, so I may as well start out humble. Just saying. Who did Jesus not get along with? He got along with pretty much everybody, didn't he? Who did he not get along with? The money changers. Who else? The Pharisees. Jesus had a sore spot for the Pharisees, didn't he? And when you think about it, what was their thing? What was their mental state? Spiritual pride. Spiritual pride. They deemed themselves deeply, richly spiritual, ritualistic. To-do lists. If you didn't do that, I was reading something recently. By some estimates, modern scholars think that the Pharisees, in order for them to stay in integrity with what they were supposed to do every day to stay holy, it was like over 600 things they had to do every day. From eating the right things, to praying in the right way, to obeisances, to all kinds of things. Can you imagine? I can barely get my dishes done. But they had spiritual pride, didn't they? They were not poor in spirit. They deemed themselves rich in spirit. On page 21 in our text, to be poor in spirit does not in the least mean the thing we call poor-spirited nowadays. Poor-spirited means depressed, right? Now, you have to remember how much the language has changed. To be poor in spirit means to have emptied yourself of all desire to exercise personal self-will, and, what is just as important, to have renounced all preconceived opinions in the wholehearted search for God. It means to be willing to set aside your present habits of thought, your present views and prejudices, your present way of life, if necessary, to jettison, in fact, anything and everything that can stand in the way of your finding God. Shall we go? Are you willing to jettison anything? And it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go. But I got to tell you, my life is not what I envisioned. It's really different from what I thought it was going to be. Because I reached a time in my process where I was willing to say, everything is up for grabs. I'm going to go where God takes me. I'm going to say yes. No matter how uncomfortable it is, and sometimes it is uncomfortable. I'm willing and I'm available. I am a humble servant of the greater idea. And I trust that it will take me where I need to be. Because I know that God is all there is. God is all there will ever be. One power, one love, one presence. And I can trust it. I can depend on it. And if I do that, what do I get? The kingdom of heaven. What the heck? The kingdom of heaven, isn't that place in the clouds where we go after we die? No. What we're talking about when we're talking about the kingdom of heaven is that state of consciousness, of bliss. Heaven and hell are right here on earth, people, right? I've been through hell. Don't want to live there anymore. The mental state of heaven, of bliss, of happiness, of contentment. This is the state that leads to the experience of bliss. And let me tell you something about this. It may lead to the experience of bliss, but it's not always comfortable. Oh, sorry. In fact, if you are always comfortable, you're not doing it. Because we're releasing those old habits and opinions and ideas and fears, and that's a process. If you're always comfortable, you're not doing the work. And yet, we can be doing the work and be blissfully happy. It depends on what we depend on. What? It depends on what we depend on. Am I poor in spirit? Am I teachable? Am I willing? Am I humble? It depends on what I depend on. You see, if I depend on those human habits and ideas and thoughts, if I depend on the judgments and opinions of other people, if I depend on my old ideas, if I depend on institutions for my happiness, I'm going to be happy as long as those things make me happy. But then the institution goes away, or the person leaves my life, or the job changes. Then what do I depend on? Well, sometimes we scramble around and we find something else, right? It's massively uncomfortable because the old support isn't there, the old thing that we depended on. And do you see how all of this is temporary? What's permanent? The infinite. God ain't going nowhere. It's right here. It's all there is. It's all there will ever be. And because it is infinite and it is all there is, you are smack in the middle of it. In fact, it is smack in the middle of you. You cannot separate yourself from the name and the nature of the infinite loving one. Oh, but we try in our spiritual pride. We try, so hard. But if I can depend on the living one, the infinite presence. You see, this Wednesday we celebrate what? Independence Day, don't we? Today I want you to celebrate Dependence Day. This is Dependence Day. You get to choose today. What do you depend on? The form, the worldly, money, the status, the stuff, God. Because I have to tell you, here's the interesting thing. If God is all there is so much more in that than there is in all your stuff. There is so much more in the infinite mind and heart of God for you than in all your money. So much more. I was reminded, a couple weeks ago, it was kind of funny. A couple weeks ago, for some reason, I started to think about the story of King Solomon in the Hebrew Bible. And I went and I read it, and I was like, this is good. I got to work it into a sermon soon. And look, here it is. I was like, thank you, God. When Solomon became the king, God said to Solomon, what do you want? And, Solomon had some problems. He had a lot of people to rule. He had a lot, and he said, I read it 2 weeks ago, but I know it's still here. What Solomon said is, give me an understanding heart. Give me an understanding heart. You see, now God was going to give Solomon whatever he asked for. He could have asked for riches. He could have asked for all kind of stuff. But what did he ask for? An understanding heart. And God said to him, wow, that's pretty deep. Thanks. That's wise. What a smart request. And because you had the wisdom to ask for that, I'm going to give you an understanding heart. And I'm also going to give you the riches and the long life and the happy family and all of the other things that lead to your bliss. An understanding heart, depending on the infinite love of God, leads to that life that is so fulfilling and leads to our bliss, even when we're uncomfortable. What do you depend on? Are you willing to be led by Spirit? How do we do this? How do we depend on God in this realm where all of this stuff seems so pressing and important, and there's needs, and there's politics, and there's this, and there's that, and there's family, and there's job, and got to pay the bills, but how do we depend on God? I really think that the simplest way to think about it is that our practice is to become more godlike. Our practice is to duplicate, we've been talking in financial freedom class, duplicate the nature of Spirit in our lives. If we try to become more godlike, if we make our practice about becoming more godlike, that begins to shine through us. For example, have you ever had an experience in which you felt like you could use a little more love? Perhaps you weren't loving someone else. Perhaps you were having negative opinions. Perhaps you were angry. Now wait a minute, God is love. What if I could love like God loves? Unconditional, perfect, whole love. The kind of love that doesn't depend on whether you behave the way I think you should or not. The kind of love that is infinite and present and accepting and always there. What if I just decided I was going to practice that kind of love? I was going to become more God-like by duplicating the nature of God in how I behave in my life. Have you ever felt powerless? I have. What if I thought about the nature of God power? What is the nature of God power? The nature of God power is that which can burn the sun The nature of God power is the power that can burn the stars in the infinite heavens. God power is that power that can create a solar system and a planet and humanity to populate it and animals and trees. The God power is the power that's in the acorn to make an oak tree. What if I began to cultivate that kind of power and let go of my victim ideas of powerlessness and began to recognize, oh, I am an acorn in the mind of God, and that power is going to lift me out of this to be the oak that is thriving and healthy and strong. I align with God power. Ever felt sad or depressed? Me too. What if I thought about the infinite joy of the universe? What if I thought about the stars just laughing in their places in the infinite heavens? What if I thought about the laughter of a tiny child? You know, I have to say, the internet to me is both a blessing and a curse. I saw a video the other week of it was like this minute-long video of a baby waking up. That's all it was. It was just somebody was videoing their baby while their baby was asleep, and the baby was slowly waking up. And the joy as that baby came awake and opened his or her eyes and saw its parent or loved one filming it, and this huge smile just busted out. And this baby was not more than 6 or 8 months old. And it knew where its love was from. And the joy with which that baby's face lit up, that's God joy. So my task, my practice becomes to duplicate the nature of spirit, to become more godlike, to practice from a place of humility. Not a place of spiritual pride, but a place of humility. Do you kind of see what we're talking about here? Not that that God's love is my love now, and that means I'm an amazing paragon of love. I'm going to be available to the infinite love of God and see how well I can practice that. And you know what? When I fail, I'm not going to beat myself up. I'm not going to get the whips out. I'm just going to give it a little more practice and see if I can't do it a little more better next time. You think you could do that? Be teachable, be available, be present to the infinite love. You know, thinking about King Solomon, it's said that he wrote the Proverbs, or at least some part of the Proverbs. And one of the Proverbs is, with all thy getting, get understanding. And it makes sense to me that he would have written that, because he's the one who said, you know what I really want, God? I want an understanding heart. You see the spiritual humility in that? With all of our getting, ideas, things, people, possessions, get understanding. Be humble in the face of the infinite. And it will provide. It will inspire. It will call you into your bliss. So let's turn within and practice a little bit. Depending on the infinite. Depending on God. Take the sacred breath with me as we breathe together. Surrendering more and more fully the human ideas of success or having or needing, and simply recognizing there is an internal something, that which is always with us, that from which we came, and that which is always right where we are, the infinite mind and heart of God. And as you anchor in that awareness, allow that infinite wisdom and intelligence to show you one thing that you are ready to release. It might be an old habit or idea. It might be a possession, an opinion, a fear. What is one thing you are willing to release to make more room to become poorer in spirit, to become more available, to the presence living as you. And as you bring this thing to mind, recognize all the ways it has supported you in the past. And yet allow yourself to know that you no longer need it. For from this moment forward, you depend on God. And so this thing, this belief, this habit, this opinion, this possession, you bless it. Take this opportunity to sanctify it, to make it holy for the gifts it has given you. And now release it. And let it go. And now in the empty space, empty of everything but God, you simply allow that beingness that is already within you to bubble up. You consciously allow it. You consciously cultivate the awareness of the divine in you. And you allow yourself to know some quality of God that is going to take the place of this old thing you no longer need. Perhaps it's love, power, joy, peace, harmony, wholeness. Some way of being, some consciousness that you are willing to embody. Some consciousness of God that you are willing to depend on. And now simply commit to depending on that. Empty of all but God, I depend on God for my good. I depend on God for my love. I depend on God for my peace. I depend on God for my joy. And I concentrate my good, I consecrate my good, my peace, my joy to the good of the universe. I make the world a better place through my embodiment of these principles, of this consciousness. I make the world a better place by the very life that I live. And so simply breathing in and breathing out, surrendering, allowing. You remember more and more deeply than you ever have before who you are, what you are, who you belong to. And I invite you to sing with me. I am remembering who I am. I am remembering who I am. I am remembering who I am. I am remembering. I am remembering. I am remembering who I am. 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 And so we remember, and with a grateful heart, I close this message, calling it good and very good. And so it is. Amen.